Hello, and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your daily dose of the latest news, rumours, and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Thursday, August 3rd, and I'm your host, Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Today, we have the second part of our interview with Anna, the resident queen of Lord of the Rings Twitter. If you didn't catch the first part, go take a listen to yesterday's episode to catch up. In the second half of the interview, we talked about all things villainous, the joys of having CGI orcs back on our screens, as well as some of our fears, but also hopes for the Rings of Power. We'll jump back into the interview in a moment, but first, we must keep to tradition and begin the episode with a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from the Silmarillion, Chapter 3, of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. Yet this is held true by the wise of Eressia, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Autumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Ainulindale, before the beginning, so say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the Orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Ilúvatar. I thought it only appropriate to begin our discussion of evil in the Rings of Power with a reminder of where it all began. But with that out the way, let's dive back into our conversation with Anna. We've talked about the comedy of the Harfoots, but we also know that there's going to be a serious storyline there involving the Stranger, or as he's better known to everyone on Lord of the Rings Twitter, Meteor Man. Talk to me about your thoughts on Meteor Man. Who do you think he is? What role do you think he's going to play? Why have the show even included this character?
See, my thoughts fluctuate every single time I think about him, and I think I'm just very easily influenced because every time I see someone talk about him, I'm like, that's it, that's gotta be who he is. I think at first everyone was like, it's Gandalf, it's how he came to Middle Earth and met all the hobbits, and I don't know if I'm completely sold on that. I know a lot of people think because we've had this shot of his hand and he's wearing this kind of musty woolen woven sleeve, and they've compared it to pictures of Gandalf wearing the same thing. I'm not sold on it. I don't know if I would like it if it was Gandalf. But then if it's not, I'm like, who would it be if not maybe a villain who would, I don't know, gain the Harfoot's trust, betray them in some way, because the way he's been introduced is it's very weird because we've had some clips of him obviously coming in on the meteor, which did make me laugh a little bit just because of the way he's like curled up in the middle. And I can't really
Yeah.
take that bit seriously. But then we've had this other one of him just holding this tiny little hand, which when I first saw that, I was like, oh, that's adorable. But then if it's obviously in the context that he could be a villain, then it's like, oh, that's not adorable. So I don't know, honestly. He's kind of a mystery to me.
Yeah, I feel like I'm with you. I've gone through 12 different ideas of who I think he could be. I think I keep coming back to if he's anyone from the books, which I don't think necessarily he has to be. He could be an original character. I think a lot of people have fixated on this idea that he must be a Tolkien character, but given how many original characters we've already got, one more wouldn't surprise me. If he is a Tolkien character, I have to think he's one of the Blue Wizards. He's dressed like the other Istari. He's hanging around with hobbits. He seems to, Daniel Wayman, the actor, has talked a lot in interviews about the fact that he's got a sense of purpose and a sense of mission. Now, the one set of characters we know were sent on a mission to Middle Earth were the wizards. But the thing that holds me back on that is the only time we ever hear about the blue wizards is them as a pair. They're like two
Yeah,
best friends, and they go on their travels. And so it's weird to me if they've come separately. And then secondly, I think it's just a weird mode of transport, to put it bluntly, flying
definitely.
down on a meteor. I mean, initially I was really set on the idea it was Sauron because I thought he's holding an apple in his poster. He's falling from the heavens like a fallen angel.
Yeah,
He is, offering the apple of knowledge. And I was like, they can't give us this many Lucifer analogies and it not be Sauron. But then I kind of had that moment where I was like, hang on. But if they know that we know
yeah.
that that's the parallel, then they know that we know that they know that's the parallel. So maybe they're deceiving us. And so I think I've come to the conclusion that either he's a wizard of some description or he's a completely original character that we're not necessarily going to recognize as an individual from Tolkien's writings, but perhaps as similar to the wizards or Tom Bombadil or one of these other more kind of, even the fox who comments on the hobbits sleeping in the woods. Maybe it's just that kind of character. So I don't know. I think he's probably not a villain, though, is where I've arrived at. I'd be shocked if he was a villain.
Well, building on your point about there was too many things of it being Sauron for it not to be Sauron, I hope that that's the direction that they're going in of giving us all these people who were like, this has got to be Sauron, and then they're like, no, it's not. Like in the trailer, whether or not it was intentional, everyone just locked onto that and was like, this is Sauron. And then, after a while, everyone was like, wait, it's probably not Sauron. And I
Mm,
was shocked when they like mentioned his name in the trailer because I thought this was going to be like, he was going to be this background kind of whisper, kind of building up throughout the season. So it
mm.
did shock me a bit when they mentioned his name, but I do hope they play on this. We don't know who it's going to be, and they could trick us so many times, and I hope they do because I don't want to be like completely taken aback when it's revealed who he is, but I want to be not expecting it, I guess, because that's kind of the mystery of his character is that he was deceptive.
Yeah, I've long hoped that they would lean into this part of Sauron's background that he's a shapeshifter. He's obviously a Mile, so he can take different forms. But Sauron, famously, he becomes a vampire at one point. He's even a snake for like half a second. He changes into Anatar, his fair form, and I would like to see the show play on that. And I think, like you, that's why when I saw the actress who plays what we now think is probably some kind of priestess or cultist of Morgoth in the
Yeah,
latest trailer, I was like, yes, give me a Sauron that is kind of beautiful yet slightly creepy looking. Give me that kind of angelic androgyny.
yeah,
All of that I would love to see in the Anatar portrayal. But then I thought, well, they're not going to give us Anatar in the trailer.
exactly.
And so I've kind of thinking, are multiple characters we've seen Sauron? Could he come in various forms in the first season? Or, and I'm starting to think this is more and more likely, is he literally going to walk into scene in episode 8 and we won't have seen him for the first 7 episodes? Is that a possibility, I guess?
Yeah, I think because obviously they've kind of built is it Adar up to be this big bad guy, and I don't know whether that's still his name, but that's still what I'm gonna call him because it took me so long to accept that as his villain name, and as soon as I grew to love it, I saw this, oh, that's not his name, it's changed. But no, he'll always be that to me. And I was very skeptical at first because I guess he's like technically an original character, but I think he's gonna be based on just Tolkien villain of some sort. But I
Mm,
do like the idea of this person kind of organizing all the orcs who also look incredible. We haven't like spoke about that yet, but they look fantastic. But the scenes we've seen of them so far, it's like shot from the back and he's walking and they all kind of like move out of his way and bow to him a little. I think I'm really interested to see that kind of thing, and I think he'll be really cool. His actor looks kind of intimidating, but in a really good way. He's just got that like villain look.
Yeah, he Joseph Maul, who's playing Adar or Orin or whatever his name is. I know for listeners, we covered this on episode 2. We had a bit of a discussion about this, and we didn't really come to any firm conclusions. But we've heard rumors he's one of Galadriel's brothers, maybe an original one. Maybe that's more of a when we use brother. Maybe we're using it here in terms of brothers in arms.
Mm.
We don't know. This is all speculation and rumor, and as I always say, speculation and rumor are just that till we see it on the show. But I think, like you say, what's most interesting about his character isn't to me like who he is. Clearly, he's some kind of corrupted elf. Clearly, he's probably going to have some connection to Galadriel or the Noldor in general. So I don't know exactly where that's going to fit in. But I think it's so interesting that we're getting a villain in close proximity to the orcs. And I don't want to say, I know Adar means father in Sindarin, and I don't want to try and say that he's a parental figure to the orcs, but he kind of is. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a fascinating route for the show to take.
Yeah, because I guess we kind of saw it with the Uruk-hai and Saruman that he was kind of leading them out of fear, but I it kind of gives me more of this vibe that these orcs are following him because out of kind of a respect or just like an understanding because he's come in and he's organized them, in a time when orcs went these like huge armies that we know from
Mm.
Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I think that's quite an interesting dynamic to play on. There's like a lot they could do with that.
I completely agree. I think there's an opportunity for the show to give us a slightly different take on orcs in terms of culture, the individual interactions. And I've heard some people say, oh, you shouldn't humanize orcs. And I don't think the show is going to humanize orcs. But if you read Tolkien, the first orcs were elves that were tortured and corrupted. And one of the things Tolkien struggled with his whole life was this idea that do orcs have free will? Because if they do have free will because they're corrupted elves, then it's not really okay for Aragorn to go around lopping off 100 of their heads, in every battle. But if they're not corrupted elves and they're just kind of creations of Morgoth and Sauron, then what's interesting about them? They're just kind of machines almost. They're machines with flesh. Um, and I think it's interesting that the show's clearly going down this route of them being corrupted elves. And I know you've already addressed this, but we kind of have to talk about the amazing prosthetics and design and all of that. That orc in the trailer who crawls up from Bronwyn's floorboards and then his clawed
Yeah.
hand extends. It felt like I was watching a horror film.
Like someone said to me the other day that when it's because I don't mind CGI. I'm one of those people, and I won't notice if CGI is bad unless it's terrible. I don't mind it, but there's just a noticeable difference when something is practical. It's just so much more grounded, and the orcs just feel, and not to compare it to The Hobbit, because I do love the Hobbit films, and I know it probably doesn't sound like that lately,
Slander the Hobbit, Anna. Anna, say bad things about the Hobbit films. Everyone's listening to you on Twitter.
as much as they have stuff that I love. I none of the villains felt none of them had any gravity to me. I was never that intimidated by them, and it's a bit of a controversial take, but I don't cry when Fili or Keely or Thorin die, and I know that that's horrible because I like them as characters, but there is nothing about the villains that they're facing that invest me, I guess, in what they're doing because it
Mm,
just seems so. I just feel kind of removed from these fight scenes when they're taking place because they just
yeah.
never feel quite grounded, I
Do
guess.
you know it's so true. I always go back to what I think is arguably one of the best fight scenes of the original trilogy, which is Aragorn and Lurtz in Amon Hen in the Fellowship of the Ring. And part of it is that there's that raw physicality to it where he's grabbing Aragorn, pushing him against the tree, then Aragorn's stabbing him in the thigh and he pulls it out. And that scene is, to this day, I still watch that and feel a bit squeamish. But you do feel like it's two people is maybe the wrong word, but two actual physical beings having a fight. And I think the
Yeah.
problem you had with the Jackson films was that there's just that part of your brain, right, that goes, I know that there's no, yes, I know orcs aren't real anyway, but I really know now that, Thorin is just fighting something that isn't there.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just, like you said, you can't almost explain it. It just, that there is nothing physically real there, and it takes you out of the immersion.
Yeah, it's like I know obviously the entire thing is fantasy, but I could picture Let's standing in front of me and like attacking me. I don't want to picture it, but I could. Like I could imagine him being there, but if I was picturing one of the Hobbit villains, I feel like it would just be like this cartoon character stood there and I would just laugh at it, I guess.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then I haven't been able to watch that Aragorn and Let scene since I rewatched the behind the scenes footage of it. I don't know if you've ever seen this clip, but the actor who plays Let, he's in like full get up, but his hair's like pulled back in this bright pink bobble, and he's just stood there going, "Go Lerts!" And every time I see that scene, that's all I can think about.
Yeah, I do remember that, and I think, do you know what? It's interesting. I've kind of almost come full circle on this, because not only do I think, yes, the CGI in the Hobbit films was bad, but the one thing I'll say in their defense regarding the Orcs, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things I like about the Hobbit films. I enjoy them. I enjoy them more as just films than as adaptations. I think they're entertaining films. Um, but one of the things I did like was that we got, and it wasn't amazingly executed, but we got some interactions between orcs, between Azog and whatever the other orc
Yeah,
was called. It can't be that good because I've forgotten the name, but um, I want to see more of that. And I think we heard in that first IGN article that we're going to not get to know these orcs, but there are going to be some that, much like Lurtz or Gothmog in the third film, or Shagrat and Gorbag, we're going to get to know some of these, at least for a few episodes.
yeah,
And I would really love that.
I'm excited to kind of have some that I can pick out as characters that I recognize, and also if anyone who didn't know Tolkien just listened to you list off all those things, they would
Yeah.
think that there's something wrong with you.
I mean, they would be right. There is something wrong with me, but no, you're 100% right. The naming of orcs, and I think we should maybe discuss this, because now that we've got two Brits on the pod, I want to get on my personal bugbear about orcs in Tolkien, and it's stop making them have Cockney accents. It's irritated me for like 20 years, and I don't know what it is. It's just like, I can sense that this was written by a professor of English at Oxford University in the early 20th century, who thought that Cockneys were basically lesser people. And I know that's such an intense reading of what is a light-hearted thing for the books, but every time I see people go, "Oh yeah, I hope the orcs are Cockney," all I can think is, no, I hope they sound like a journalist on the BBC who went to a Red Brit University. That's what I want.
Maybe they'll
Posh
sound like
orcs.
you've got that quite British thing going on. Imagine an orc, but just with your voice. Like
Yeah.
I could picture it, but no, as long as they've not got really thick Scouse accents that everyone's gonna make fun of, I'm happy with Cockney orcs. I've never really thought about their accents that much before, but now that you think about it, there is. They are quite
It's
very. Yeah.
it's just a choice, but I don't think you need to worry. Something tells me that
Scouse.
Scouse accents. No.
I mean, you
Yeah, I
never know.
mean,
It would be quite an unconventional route to go down.
oh, well, I was really hoping that they would make all the hobbits sound like they were from Dudley and kind of the West Midlands, because now everyone's going to think of Peaky Blinders these days, but at the end of the day, Tolkien's Shire was based on the West Midlands, so I
Yeah,
would love to hear a Coventry accent or a Birmingham accent. That would be. I think they're going more of this Irish route, which is
yeah.
fine, but
I like what we've heard from Lenny Henry's. All we've heard from him so far is the skies are strange, but I love the way he delivered it. It's just so
mm,
hobbity, and I know that's not a proper word, but I feel like everyone knows what I mean when I say that it's hobbity.
yeah, it's definitely hobbity. I think we've largely covered the villains. We've talked about Adar. We've talked about Meteor Man, if he is a villain. My next question is going to the book characters that we know from the books, that we've maybe even had adaptations of in the past if they've lived to to the Third Age, which is admittedly not many of them. Who are you most excited for from those original characters? Who can you just not wait to see on screen?
As in that we've already seen in the trailers and stuff.
Oh well, if there's people that are not in the trailers that you're even more excited for, then I'm happy to hear those two.
No, the most unexpected person I've been excited about is definitely Gil Galad because he's never, I mean, he's a great character, but he's never been one of my favorite characters, who I've wanted to like know like a lot more about and stuff. But all
Mm,
the things we've got from him so far, and I think a lot of it is down to the actors' interviews that I've seen. But I'm really excited for him. I was watching one today, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was this really good quote that he said about how can elves live through seeing all their loved ones die? How can they live through this like rise of evil after evil? And I just love his take so far on Gil-galad, so I'm
mm,
really excited to see him. And also he mentioned this like kind of mentor mentee relationship between him and Elrond, which I'm really excited to see
yes.
because, obviously all we saw from them in the films was they're fighting together and now he's dead. So that'll be quite an interesting thing to see, I guess. And obviously there's Galadriel, who isn't excited to see her? And you know what? When that casting was first announced, I hated it. And I will admit that.
Did you?
I really didn't like it. I just couldn't see Galadriel in Morford at all. I couldn't.
Mm,
But as soon as that like first picture was released, I was like, this. If you ever asked me to imagine a young, fierce like warrior Galadriel, this is who I would picture, and I think she's going to be amazing. She's probably who I know I'm going to be most excited for her scenes. I just think her plot sounds incredible as well because we didn't really have a lot of that before the past few months. It was just kind of, we're in the second age, everyone's here, go crazy.
mm.
But kind of have this idea of what's going to happen, and she seems to be leading a lot of the plot, which I'm excited to see, and I'm just excited to see her interact with all these other characters, especially Elrond, because I think they've got quite an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think, you know, it's I am really excited. I mean, when people ask me, I often actually say that I'm really excited for the Numenor plotline, particularly um, getting to see Isildur going from a young man to the future king to the kind of tragic hero who makes this awful mistake. And one of the things I'm most excited for is that we're going to get a portrayal of Isildur that is accurate, because the way Jackson portrayed him is, I know it was just a 5-second cameo basically, but it made a lot of people think he was almost this kind of villain.
It was kind of two-dimensional, I guess.
Yeah, and I completely understand they didn't have the time and all of that, but I did walk away from that film before, because I watched the first film before I read the books, and I remember coming away from that and thinking, oh well, Isildur. I mean, I guess he was just a bad guy, who was lucky to be there.
Yeah.
But when you read the books and when you read the story, even in Unfinished Tales of the disaster at the Gladden Fields, right at the very moment up until he dies, he's trying to do the right thing. He's failing because of the mistake he's made in not destroying the ring in the first place, but he's still trying to do the right thing, which I find really endearing. But going back to what you were saying, the Gil-galad Elrond dynamic is something that I'm really excited for. I know it's
Yeah.
something we've talked a lot about in the past, is this idea that Elrond, as an orphan, not having a family, not having anyone to turn to. And I'm really excited that they do seem to be exploring that idea of, at least, I know Benjamin Walker said it in the same interview I think you were referencing, there's this mentor-mentee
Yeah.
relationship, but I also hope that to an extent it's slightly parental as well, mainly just because I would like Elrond to have a father figure who sticks around in his life, but that's just me. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of things to be excited about there. Before I ask you what you're most worried about in the show, is there a scene, and it can be from the first season or that you expect to see in later seasons, what is the moment you are most excited to see depicted on screen? Is there one that comes to mind for you?
There isn't anything specific, but what my favorite thing about fantasy, without fail, is the battles. And I love high fantasy because they have these like grand, bloody, like horrible battles. And I feel like if they're gonna do a battle in the Rings of Power, it's gonna be this really large scale, like brutal thing. And I really want to see something like that.
So the takeaway from this is that Anna is bloodthirsty for war. Then basically, that's what
Yeah,
the listener should
basically,
take away.
I just like to watch different people in Middle Earth die. That's like my thing with Tolkien
Right.
stories, which I get a lot of. He really comes through with that promise.
He does. He does. He's rewriting for you as an audience, I think there, and I think there's a lot of great battles to come. I mean, we're obviously going to have some invented battles, but there's the War of the Last Alliance. There's going to be the sack of Eregion. So there's lots of. I mean, let's not even talk about what's going to happen to Celebrimbor, because if we talk about gruesome ends, then I think that really tops the list, doesn't it? Or Gilgalad, depending on your perspective.
So yeah, it's time to talk about Celebrimbana, as you like to call him.
Are we going to talk about Celebrimbor?
I mean, come on, you cannot go through this without talking about Celebrimbor. He's like your guy.
He is. He is my guy. Do you know what, Anna? Thank you. Celebrimbor is my guy. Allow me, listeners, to just talk to you about why Celebrimbor is my guy, and more specifically, why Charles Edwards is my guy.
Hmm.
Point number one: people were incredibly mean to Charles Edwards when he was cast, and that doesn't sit well with me. So it's going to put me on the defensive. Two: Celebrimbor is a lot like Isildur in that he makes, one, maybe two bad decisions and dooms the fate of Middle Earth.
Yeah,
I respect that. And three, I genuinely think Charles Edwards is going to give us a masterful performance. Every interview I've read has been just someone who gets the themes, who gets the characters. He's talking about the weight of Feanor's shadow. He's talking about the desire to create, which is such a big thing in Tolkien's work. He's got gravitas. If anyone's seen him in TV shows like The Crown or Downton Abbey, he's a really fantastic actor at portraying large emotions in small ways. That's the only way I can describe it. He can do a lot of non-verbal acting that I think will really serve him well in this role. And
like the little finger wiggle he did in the trailer.
yes, like the little finger wiggle we saw today, which I was completely normal about, and I'm just really happy to see him smiling. Uh,
Yeah.
this is so getting cut from the episode. It might not. It might not. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, no, I would love to see. I mean, weirdly, my view is that I'm probably going to be disappointed by Celebrimbor in the first season, not by the acting or the performance, but because we're not going to get to the core of his storyline, right? Because we're probably not going to get Sauron show up. If we see him at all, maybe he appears as Anatar in Eregion in episode 8, maybe, but I'm not confident in any way of that. So I I think season 2 is when I'm really going to enjoy that storyline and when I'm really going to get to enjoy Charles Edwards' performance. But seeing as you've asked me about it, what are your thoughts on Celebrimbor, Celebrimbana?
Well, Celebrimbana. I was the same when it was first announced. I leaped straight on the defensive, and I was like, no. The thing about Tolkien adaptations for me is that they have never gone wrong with the casting. Like, you can say as much bad as you want, even
Mm,
about the Hobbit films. There was not a single character that was miscast. So, and even what we've seen for the Rings of Power, I think they've completely nailed it so far. So they
mm,
know what they're doing. They're not gonna cast someone who doesn't fit the role. And I do understand the complaints that he doesn't match everyone's views of
mm,
Celebrimbor. He's older, like an older actor than what people would expect, but it doesn't take anything away from his character to me. I think the merit of his performance isn't how old or how young he is, and we've barely seen anything from him except
mm.
a few pictures, and I definitely don't think it's enough to
Yeah,
judge him on. So, and your excitement for him is making me even more excited for him. So I think he's going to be great.
me too, me too. And I think you just reminded me of something, and I had forgotten about this until I was talking about Celebrimbor the other day with someone. We still haven't heard him speak in a single trailer. I have no idea what he's going to sound like. I have no idea what he's going to be talking about. I have no idea. of a lot of things. And so that openness is getting me even more excited for it, because I think where there's that opportunity and open-endedness, they can do a lot of interesting things with this character. And I also think people jumped a little bit too hard on the costume design. It's fine if you don't like it. That's very subjective. I'm not going to tell anyone to love every costume. But I also think people need to remember that he's not going to be sitting around in his forging outfit all day. He's not going to be wearing a leather apron and gloves and, all the rest all day. He's going to want to be comfortable. I mean, don't we all? That's what I think.
Yeah, well, what I think about a lot of the reactions to the characters is people are acting like they're reacting to these people who are covered in like layers and layers of prosthetics and makeup and don't look like the
Mm,
actors themselves, because they're tweeting things like, "Oh, I don't like how Elrond looks and Celebrimbor isn't as attractive as I thought he would be." And it's like, you're just calling some random actors who got picked for the role because they're good at it and because they didn't live up to this idealized picture that you have of them in your head. You're just like, oh, ugly. What? Like,
it's no, it's
I
really
don't get it.
disappointing, and it's one thing I've been really trying to encourage is people like I said, if you don't like the costume design, I mean, that's fine. I disagree, but if it's just not your aesthetic, that's fine. That's completely fine. I think if you say the costume design looks cheap, then I'm probably going to have a different conversation. But when it comes to actors, I think people need to remember that none of the performances in the original trilogy, or just think of any other adaptation of a book you've ever watched, none of the none of the performances have been based on how they look. And I have to say, I went through this with Game of Thrones. I was in the fandom not as a contributor, but just as a lurker for, a good 6, 7 years. And I remember when we saw Oberyn get cast as Pedro Pascal, not only did some of the kind of more trollish individuals come forward with their takes, but there were just people saying, "Oh, he doesn't look like this," and the same with when Jamie and Cersei were cast in the very first season. People said, "Oh, they're too old." But by the time you got to the end of season one, no one was saying they were miscast. And I just think people need to remember you've seen probably 5 minutes of the whole show up till now, and you've seen very little dialogue. You haven't seen a whole complete scene of any dialogue. You haven't seen a single start to finish, the scene begins, the scene ends. And like you said, anyone who's going after actors for their looks, I mean, A, it's disappointing, but B, I think it speaks to people who are carrying a lot of insecurity and hatred, and they should let go of that and learn to be kinder.
Yeah, I just think if that's your biggest criticism about the character, or if that's the most important thing about them to you, that they need to be attractive, it's like, do you like the character or do you just want someone attractive to
Mm,
watch on screen? Because I think a lot of the merit is the character themselves. They could be the most unattractive
yeah.
person in the world, and they could have such a deep, amazing character and be acted so well. And it's, why would you let that stop you from appreciating a really good character?
Well, before we finish, I want to do two things. First, I want to ask you, what are you worried about? Because we've talked a lot about what we're excited for, but I think it's only fair that I ask you: do you have any core worries or fears about the show?
My biggest fear, and don't get me wrong, I have so much faith that this is going to be amazing. But my biggest fear is that I am just going to be completely wrong and it's going to be a travesty. And then I'm going to have to come on, and all these people who I've been like, just watch the show and you'll be proven
Mm,
wrong. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to have to be like, okay,
yeah.
guys, you are all right. But no, I have faith, but I think it's going to be good. My main fear is that I think I'm just going to be disappointed because, like I said, I've tried not to let my expectations get too high. So I think I'm gonna be entertained no matter what, but I want to have that kind of sense of wonder and sense that I'm back in Middle Earth, because it's a very specific feeling that you get when you
Mm.
watch the Jackson films. Like, feel like you're there in Middle Earth, and I want that kind of same feeling. And I know it's probably quite hard to replicate, so we'll see.
It reminds me of two things. One, this Monday we did an episode on my fears and worries, and one of the things I said is that I don't want them to replicate the Jackson films, and in fact, I would like them to be bold and do different things. But for me, I do think there's a magic to the Jackson films, and we talked about this on Twitter the other day when you asked your audience to submit their saddest scenes because you like making people upset on Twitter. So and we appreciate you for that. But immediately my mind went to that scene of Elrond and Arwen talking in the Two Towers. We have the vision
Yeah,
of Aragorn dying and Arwen fading away, and there's something about that scene and several other scenes in the Jackson trilogy that have nothing to do with uh, action, fights, or even dramatic moments. They're the quieter moments where I think that's where you almost feel like, even if it's not words from the book, you feel like the essence of Tolkien has seeped into that scene, and that's what I want from the show.
exactly.
I want scenes where it's not that I need to hear dialogue that was in the books, and it's not even that I need to see scenes that was in the books. I need to get the same feeling that I do when I read Beren and Luthien, or when I read the end of the Akalabeth, or when I read, Aldarion and Arendis, these great tales. That's the kind of feeling I want, and it's less about a moment than it is a feeling, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah. I was kind of realized that I was being really hypocritical when it came to the Jackson films because, I've been saying to people who, in response to seeing things from the Rings of Power, they're like, they're not like Peter Jackson's films, they're going to ruin his films. And I come back to them and I'm like, his vision of Middle Earth, it's not the only one, they don't want to be a carbon copy. But then at the same time, I struggled so much when I found out that Bear McCreary was
You
going to be
did.
doing most of the score because my vision of Middle Earth was so like intrinsically tied to Howard Shore's music. I was like, I don't think I could accept another one, but I was being so hypocritical and I was very, very wrong. So that's one of the only times I've been happy to
For a
be
second there, I
proven
thought you were going to
wrong.
say that was one of the only times I've been wrong on Lord of the Rings Twitter, but I appreciate that you clarified. Um, no, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think whether it's been casting, costume design, whatever it's been, there's been a lot of things that people have initially kind of gone, I don't think I like that, and then have come round to it. I've certainly had that with the Harfoots. I've had that with some of the plots. The time compression thing initially really bothered me, and I've actually come to just feel like there was never going to be a version of the Second Age that wasn't with a compressed timeline. So I just kind of I've accepted it and moved on, and now it's part of my understanding. But I'm glad that whether it's me with the Harfoots, you with the music, the more we've been seeing, the more excited we've got. And so I would say, in response to your fear, that your biggest fear is that it's a travesty and that you'll have to go back to the haters cap in hand to apologize. I wouldn't worry about that. I think it may not be perfect. It may not, as I said months ago on Twitter, it may not rise to the level of Jackson's films. Not that I think it should be compared against it, but if you want to compare it, sure, maybe it won't. Maybe it won't be as good as the film that has the tied win for most Oscars ever. Okay, if that's the standard we're setting, then that's quite a high standard, right?
Yeah.
But I think it'll be good, and maybe it'll be great, and maybe it will be amazing. I hope it's amazing, but I have no doubt that this will be good television. So that's me trying to put your mind at rest, I think.
Yeah, I think, that's my deepest, darkest fear about the show. But no, I do have a lot of faith, and it's like you said, every single thing that has come out about it has kind of just built my confidence up a bit more. And I think that everything that they're releasing is kind of slowly quelling a lot of the
Mm,
big doubts that people have about the show. And I think it's probably kind of on purpose because there's a lot of big worries I know a lot of people have. People are still very hung up
mm,
on the short haired elves, which it, I like long haired elves, of course. You've got like Thranduil, you've got Legolas. They're like the gold standard of elves. But it doesn't bother me. I don't really mind. I've never really thought too much about the hair. I guess I know a lot of people think that do you ever have it when like two people get into an argument in the comments of your tweet and you just kind of silently follow along in it, but you never
yeah.
like input anything? These two people, I think I tweeted about Robert as Elrond and how I didn't
Mm,
mind that he had short hair. And these people kind of got into it. One of them was arguing that Tolkien said the essence of the elves was in their hair, and then the other one was like, no, they pull out this quote and they're like, the hair color, maybe the
mm.
hair length had nothing to do with it. And then it went back and forth for so long, and I was like, you know what? I'd rather just kind of step back and not care about it than spend so much time thinking about it.
There is a value in that, right? There's a value in just saying, you know, we don't have to relitigate these arguments because we've now known for 6 months that some of the elves are going to have short hair. It is what it is. If you don't like it, you don't like it. I appreciate that, but I don't think it's a good faith criticism to say that it's disrespecting
Mhm.
Tolkien's work or it's somehow at the core of his ideas. I had a conversation with someone a while back and I said I cannot imagine reading Tolkien and thinking that the core of his writing was about skin color, hair length, gender roles. I think all those surface level
Yeah,
things that have more to do with our current culture and climate and that have been, kind of politicized by bad faith actors in some corners of the internet as well. I think it's impossible for me to read The Lord of the Rings and come away thinking, whatever his flaws and personal biases that he brought into the books, it is impossible for me to read Tolkien's work and think this was someone who cared about these surface level things. Because if he did, we know what color Legolas's hair was.
exactly. And I think if that's what you're focused on when you're reading his stories, you just, the entire essence and meaning of his work is just completely flying over your head.
I think we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to today. But seeing as you are the unofficial queen of Lord of the Rings Twitter, I wanted to see if you could make the argument to people who might listen to this podcast who aren't on Lord of the Rings Twitter and think of Twitter in general as a bit of a hellscape site where people argue with each other. What would you say in defense of Twitter and more specifically Lord of the Rings Twitter? Why should people come on and have conversations and engage with the likes of us?
Well, I'm going to preface this and say that no matter where you go on social media, you're always going to have the horrible people who find you. Like it's a given. It's like a rite of passage of being on social media. But like I said at the start, the reason I joined Lord of the Rings Twitter was because I didn't really have anyone in my life who was as passionate as me as about Tolkien, and I didn't really know whether I was going to find it on there because it can be kind of intimidating when you first join Twitter and it's just all these people who you don't know, and a lot of them already know each other and they're all interacting and you don't want to kind of butt in. But I think after about a month, I, you follow the right people, and I think I've curated myself like a really nice little part of Tolkien Twitter, and I think as a good starting point for people coming to join, there are like a few content creators I'd maybe suggest, and this isn't like promo or anything, but obviously, it's people who are positive and
Mm,
inclusive. So you've got like Don Marshall, who's has all this like pride match with Elvish pronouns on, and it's not for everyone, but he makes
mm,
people feel welcome in a Tolkien space where they might not have felt welcomed elsewhere. And you've got people like Tea with Tolkien and all these
mm,
podcasts. You've got Silmer Emily, and they're all just such lovely people who they're always like willing to chat about Tolkien with you. And everyone has their own kind of view of it. I know I do. I have some kind of controversial Tolkien opinions. You have some controversial Tolkien opinions, but we have just this nice place where we can talk about them, we can joke about them, we can have group chats where we like panic over all this new content in, and it's a lovely place. And I'm very
mm,
biased because I've been here for like a year, but it's a lovely place. And if you find the right people on here, then it's just a really nice place to be. And it helps because I know I struggle a lot with sometimes my interest in things can fizzle out if I one not really getting any content for it, but if I don't have anywhere to kind of express it. And it's just such a good place to kind of remember why you love Lord of the Rings or why you love Tolkien, because there's always going to be a tweet that you come across that will resonate with you. For me, a lot,
Mm,
it's like the sad tweets, which I do a lot, but it'll be one about Boromir and the Hobbits, or it'll be about Arwen and Elrond, and it's just stuff like that, which is why it reminds me of why I love the stories, and it's just really nice to talk to people about it.
yeah.
That was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. That was great. I was just sitting there like, this is because I kept thinking like, I should add something, and then I was like, no, she just keeps hitting the mark. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the joy of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings Twitter is that you just get to whatever you're interested in, right? Whether it's the books, the films, the new TV show, whether it's the fan art, the fan fiction, the creative interpretation, people making edits of trailers with different music on. As you said, great community figures, people like Don, people like Tea with Tolkien. There's 100 others I'm sure we could mention. And I think I really come back to that thing you said, that if you don't have people to talk to about your passions, you will slowly lose them and just move them to the side because you say, well, who am I going to talk about them with? And I think if you feel passionately about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien or the new show or the films, whatever part of it you feel passionate about, come spend maybe just a couple of hours a week looking at what people are talking about, what they're creating, have some conversations with people, listen to some content, and I think it's a great way to reignite your interest and to keep it going as well. So 100% agree with your message there. And the only thing I'll add is that if you do come on Lord of the Rings Twitter, have a liberal use of the block button for any trolls that make their way into your lands.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being the first guest on the Daily Rings of Power podcast, Anna. It has been an absolute pleasure. We've got to talk about so many fun, interesting, exciting things. We've got to talk about hopes and fears, and we've got to, talk about some of the reasons why we just love being in this space. So thank you so much for coming on. Tell the people listening where they can find you, where they can follow you.
I am on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram as MyElessar, and every time someone asks me to kind of describe what I post, I have no idea, but I remember that the OneRing.net once introduced me as just an Aragon simp account, basically, and at my core, that's what I am. I just post about Aragon, I post about the Rings of Power, and I post a lot of sad tweets about Lord of the Rings, so if that's your kind of thing, then another reason why you should come and join Lord of the Rings Twitter.
You should. I will also second that and say Anna posts fantastic content. It is largely about Aragorn and the rest is sad, but I guarantee you that you will enjoy it and that you'll find through Anna a lot of wonderful people, because one of the things that I think is great is that you often share other people's, whether it's art or tweets or anything, and that's one of the joys of it. Thank you once again for coming on, Anna. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. I hope that at some point in the future, maybe after the shows come out, you'll come on and join us as a guest once again on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. I hope you all enjoyed my extended conversation with Anna. While I know this podcast is primarily a quick daily recap of all things Rings of Power, I really enjoyed getting to discuss the show at length with someone as smart and funny as Anna. Hopefully in future, we'll be able to have more members of the community join the podcast to discuss the show in general, or even specific topics. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a comment on Twitter or a rating and review on your favourite podcast platform. Next episode, we'll be back to our normal format. I can't promise that I'll be able to give you a final episode on Friday of this week, as I'm travelling out the country tomorrow morning, and may not have time to record before leaving. But either way, I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Namarie.